to start? Are you recording?
I just hit record.
Okay.
So I'm just going to welcome everybody again, and welcome to Jean's presentation today on using Kumu and really talking about how it is all connected. And I'm assuming everybody on is systems thinkers because that's why you're here. I just want to welcome you. And like I said earlier, be sure and use the chat box to enter any questions you have for Jean, any comments, any references, because we can share the chat box information later as well. And as I also mentioned, the recording will be on Jean's YouTube channel as well as my YouTube channel. I'm having trouble saying YouTube today. Sorry about that. Anyway, so Jean, I'm going to turn it over to you, let you introduce yourself. I have a feeling people on the call know you.
Well, from looking at the attendees, I think I've run into most everyone here somewhere along the way. No introductions actually necessary. It's all connected, an introduction to Kumu. And for the comment about system thinkers, it's a good thing you didn't attend my last presentation, which is entitled Systems Thinking Bah Humbug. So what I wanted to talk to today was sort of provide an overview of Kumu, which is a web-based environment for doing relationship mapping. Relationship mapping in multiple forms. You can use it to do causal loop diagrams. You can use it to do relationship mapping of anything that you want to track, such as stakeholders or social networks or community concepts. Anything that you think you would benefit from a visual representation of how things are connected or related, as opposed to just a textual description of it. And I'll show you that you can become productive with Kumu in about 15 minutes, though you can get lost in it forever because there is an uncountable number of options for actually doing the way that you decorate things. So if I go to the tour, I said you can do causal loop diagrams. You can also, it has facilities to allow you to develop a relationship map and then look at cross sections or subsections of that map, as you might find it more meaningful to look at how some portions of it are related as to being overwhelmed by looking at all of it at once. You can also add additional data to the relationships so that rather than just have elements that have a label to them, you can also define additional fields that you attach to the things that you're doing relationships about. If you have people as part of the relationships, you might want to know about where they live or their phone number, email address, a number of different things. As in terms of cities, you might want to know about the size of the city, the geographical location, or population, a number of different things. So you can extend the basic definition of what you're developing relationships for relatively easily. There is also, and I'll talk about doing decorating to some extent, but this is the place that people often get lost because there's simply an endless array of options in terms of how to decorate things. There's also a built-in statistical analysis capability to look at relationships between or the connections in the network to provide a sense of the extent to which certain things in the relationship model are connected. And then you can also develop custom controls in terms of back here where I said where was it here? You could look at different cross sections in this manner by doing the selections. You can also set it up to have custom controls. So it's very easy for someone to go ahead and say, I want to see Midwest or Northeast. And that's completely configurable when you develop the map. When you develop a relationship map, you can also embed them. You can create a presentation from the relationship model to show people just some portion of it bit by bit so that you can explain it as you unfold it to them, as opposed to overwhelming them with all of it at once. This was one that was done about the quality of life in Hawaii. The overall map is extremely overwhelming, and even some of the subsets look pretty much overwhelming. But they put it together so that it does a description of the pieces as it unfolds them and presents them to you. If you're going to use Kumu, I advise that you initially very quickly go to the bottom and click Chat Slack and request to join the Slack group. This is where the community is supported in Slack. Let me get to the right place. There are currently almost 4,000 members in the Slack group, and there are 2 people who are dedicated to providing support to the Kumu community of users, so that if you're trying to figure something else, you can come here and post questions looking for help about various aspects of the environment, and they are very good about providing response, helping people understand. Alex and Michelle are the 2 people that are doing the support, and they're very good at it. Additionally, if you come here and look at the gallery, there are a large number of projects that people have done that are really good examples of things that people have done in the past, so that you can look at them and get ideas about maybe something that's closely related to what you're doing. And one of the nice aspects of the environment is that it's what's visible. Well, this is a presentation about networks in Baltimore, and if you look at it, all right, it talks about all of these organizations in Baltimore and the connections they have with other organizations, and they're also, notice that they have.
You want to do this before you call? You had that's how much coffee. My call's already going in.
Yeah, you want to.
I got him. I just got it.
Yeah, go jump on Chip. Hi, Chip. So that there are additional aspects, data dimensions that are defined for these, as well as doing some statistical analysis of the individual components. And they've created a legend so that they're using flags to identify which elements are which dimension of the project. So and this particular, I said this is a presentation, but if you go to a project, let me open one that we've been working on for a while. Don't cringe. There's been a few of us working on this rural community food system model for a while. If you find a project that someone else did, you can look and see the way that they defined the coloring, the way that they decorated the map to their liking, and you can reuse it. It's recyclable. Not only is the decoration recyclable, for any public project, you can come down here and you can tell it that you want to fork this project. I guess fork is the term that programmers use instead of clone. And so you can make a copy of this project that belongs to you, and you can do anything that you want with it. Now, in terms of the environment for Kumu, there are personal accounts, organizational accounts, and enterprise. You can sign up to use Kumu, and you can create all of the public projects that you care to for free. And there's only a minor limitation in terms of what the personal account has the ability to do. The organizational account gives you a little bit more control over allowing multiple people to interact with the environment and update the map, so that one person can own the map and give other people access to it to modify it. And you can do that with personal projects. In the organizational context, you have a little bit more control over that. And you also have the ability to create discussions. In this particular project that we're working on, we've had 58 discussions that we've closed, and there are 43 more discussions that are still open. And the participants, it's a discussion thread on that particular aspect of the model that we have a question about for some reason or another. And you can also look at the activity as to who changed things when. And this one's been going on for months, and the activity list is very long. But what that does is it gives you a little bit more control. And Brian, if you'll go modify this map for me at the moment so I can show them one more thing. So and as I said, you can create all of the public projects that you want for free. If you want to create a private project, which only you have access to. Oh, Alex showed up. Hello, Alex. Alex is one of the people that does support for Kumu. I showed you his name on the Slack channel, and I asked him to show up here today to keep me out of trouble. So for all the questions that I can't answer, that's why Alex is here. So if you want to create private projects, you need to pay per project, and there's a more expensive for organizational accounts. But I said it gives you a little bit more focus or access. And if you look at this project that I was looking at a moment ago, notice down here it says 2 updates. Even for the personal accounts, multiple people can work on the project at the same time. It just doesn't do real-time updates so that you know. But here, I now know that there are 3 updates to this project that have been done since I opened it. And I can look over here and I can find out that it was Brian that was doing the changes. And if I reload this, then I will go ahead and see the changes that he just made. But I'm going to have to go back over here and look to actually see what it was that he changed, because there's so many things on the map. It's not easy to see what's been changed. I said not too long ago that a person can become functional or operational or at a point to be able to create relationship maps in Kumu in 15 minutes or less. In the Kumu context, you create projects. A project consists of a map, a description for the map, and then elements and connections and loops that you define in the map. Defining elements is easy. I want an element. This is an element. So it's defined. I can then define another element, another. I can then say that I want a connection between, well, since another is already selected, it thinks I want to go from there to this, can't spell, to this, and it creates a connection between the 2 of them. It's a bit easier than that, in that I could simply hold down the Alt key and drag over here and say more stuff. By holding down the Option key, I don't have to tell it I want to make a connection. I can simply go ahead and add this. And so in terms of developing a relationship, set of relationships, I tell people that I think that it's almost as fluid as a pencil and piece of paper, but it has a much better eraser. So that as you create these things and move them around, you can go ahead and continue to modify them. In this particular setup, it's defined that the elements are fixed and they stay where you put them, but you can go ahead and on some other, if you're doing some kind of a social network map, you probably want the elements to float and they will move around on their own. So that here, I've showed that you can create elements, you can create connections, and you can also create something called a loop. A loop is, it's defined as a loop which is appropriate in the context of creating closed loop diagrams or other things that have a loop, but a loop in the Kumu context is simply some labeled set of connections. Of course, this is a loop with one connection, which makes it hard to be a loop, but you could go ahead and define a loop.
Gene?
Yes?
Brian has a question, Brian Dowling. I know you can pin elements. Can you pin connections?
Well, if the elements are pinned, the connections stay there unless you move the element. All right? The connection itself won't move unless you move the element. If the elements are floating, if I select all this stuff and tell it that I want to unpin this stuff, it's some of them are now floating, okay? A lot of them are floating, simply because I unpinned them. But the connection itself isn't pinned. And Alex, is there a way to pin a connection?
No, yeah, there's really no concept of pinning a connection because it, like you said, it always starts and ends at the elements that are on either end of it. I suppose changing the curvature is maybe kind of a similar concept, and you were showing how to do that, where if both elements are pinned, the elements on either end of a connection are both pinned, then you can just click and drag on the connection itself and it will change. And that's why you see some of them have that larger curvature. Yeah, the connections themselves, we don't actually want them to be able to be pinned. We don't want them to have a position, because then if you pin a connection and it's stuck in a certain spot and you move the elements around, all of a sudden you'll have a disconnected connection. So
okay, I can see that, but like you said, with the curvature, is there a way that I can define the curvature so that it doesn't spring back and then go over other connections and look kind of sloppy? If I want to sort of like separate it out, so it looks a little bit neater, can I do that? So
yeah, definitely having both elements pinned and then clicking and dragging the connection itself is the best way to do that. Something that I like to do often, and then to kind of answer this question too from Lori about what is the purpose of floating elements. Sometimes when I'm building a map and I'm not sure what it's going to look like or how the structure is really going to fall into place, I'll just start with everything floating and just kind of let it take its own shape, even if it's a system map. I mean, if it's a network map, if this is like a social network, pretty much always you're going to have floating elements because you want that structure to be loose and you want people to start exploring the network from a different spot every time they load up the page. But with a system map, sometimes I'll start floating, and once I see it kind of takes its own shape naturally based on the elements kind of floating around each other, then at some point I'll pin them down, and then Brian, I'll go in and I'll change all the connection curvatures to make sure things aren't overlapping. And maybe I'll move elements. I won't always leave elements exactly where they were when they were floating. I'll move those around a little bit too, depending on how I want the connections to look. In my experience on most maps is that you almost always will have some connections that overlap, but if you tinker with it and play with it, you can pretty often get to some structure where the overlap is really minimal, and even where it does happen, it's not like you have 10 connections all overlapping and you completely lose track of what they are. So in a network map like this, it's really common that you'd have tons of overlapping connections.
Yeah, makes sense.
It would be way too much work to try and pin everything down and drag every element to a position here. And you'd still have this huge, massive overlapping connection. So there are other ways to make that stuff more readable. But yeah, for system maps, usually pinning and then dragging the curvatures helps a lot.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So back to
Gene. There's two other questions. I don't know if you want to continue and then take questions at the end, or
no. I'll go ahead and answer the questions if I can.
Yeah, Alexander Laszlo says, how useful and appropriate would you say Kumu is to not only mapping a community of interest or a community of practice, but also to fostering interaction among the participants?
Interaction amongst the participants?
Yeah.
All right. So Kumu is a qualitative relationship mapping environment. Okay. So that, in other words, it doesn't do simulation. Though to better understand a set of relationships, if you stop and think about it, you cannot hold more than one relationship in your thought process at a time. You can think about the relationship between two things. If you draw a relationship map, you can look at a half a dozen relationships at the same time and get a sense of it. So in terms of better understanding the relationships that interact as to why things are the way they are, or the benefits of some of the relationships, Kumu is really good at allowing you to develop a network map of what those relationships are, and then you can look at it in different ways. So this was done for a group that had a number of people in different communities that were working on community development. And there were individuals attending meetings, there were communities, there were issues and methods. So that the issues are things that people were working on within the community. There were methods that people were employing to work on situations within communities. And as it turned out, by doing this set of connections, it made it much easier for people to find other people working on the same kind of issue in different communities, so that they could go ahead and share some of their learning along the way, so that here they find out that in terms of early people working on early childhood development, there are a number of people in different places that are involved or engaged in the same thing. And the way that I said before, this is an issue which just has a description. For all of the default entities that you create in Kumu, it has a title, a place for a tag, which is optional, but you can only have one tag, a description, one type, a description, and any number of tags that you want to add to that particular entity. And you can then add additional fields where appropriate, so that here, this person was a presenter and they presented 4 years in a row. Here's a couple of additional fields associated with them in terms of the issues that they're associated with, the communities that they're working with. So you can, as I said, you can add additional fields if there are things that you should keep track of with regard to that particular entity. Now, this is a presenter, and all of these things are relevant to presenters, but for issues, none of those things are relevant, so all those fields don't appear. And then you can set it up so that only those aspects that are appropriate do show up. So for community, if I'm looking at community, the only thing there is the issues that are being attempted to be dealt with in that particular community. Not sure how I got off on this. Well, this is meant to be a relationship model of a set of entities, as opposed to the kinds of diagrams that I do on an ongoing basis myself with other people, causal relationship models. And in this context, or what I have found really strong about Kumu is that when you do this, let me bring up one that's a little simpler, and we'll take it from there, because it's too easy to get lost in this one. So the elements are labeled. You can label the connections if it adds to the understanding. You can add a description for the elements. You can add a description for the connections. You can add a description for the loops so that people can get a better, in other words, if you look at it, you don't have to attempt to infer an understanding just from the connections and the labels on it. You can add additional dimensions to it in terms of what you meant by the pieces to give people a better chance of understanding it. And as I said, in the organizational context, you can also create discussions. So this is a discussion about that particular connection as to why it's labeled same. And so I actually had the opportunity to work with the developers for about 3 years because I was looking for something that would allow me to do storytelling, unfolding causal relationship maps as a story. And there simply was nothing out there that was sort of up to the task from the way that I wanted to do it. And I got most of what I wanted. All I needed to do was explain to them the meaning for the addition, and they added it. So in terms of doing causal relationship modeling, I'm elated and have been for several years now. Now, once they released the product, the developers never stopped. They have continued to add features and functions, lots of things that I don't have any use for, though I go and I look at the diagrams that people do, and it's relatively amazing. If you go to the gallery and look at the things that they highlighted, they're rather amazing in terms of, was one I was looking at this morning. Oh, I already showed you that one. This one, the Austin Social Entrepreneurship Map. This is an awful lot of pieces about people and organizations in the Austin area that they're looking at in terms of what the groups are, employment, management structure, website, individuals associated with them as contact points, I guess. And this is, you notice this is a floating one. But if you were looking for anything in particular, there's a very well-defined search feature that you can search on the fly across here, or it will also do structured searches based on the elements and looking at the way that the individual data items are in terms of, if you look at this, the search that they built was rather amazing in terms of, if I say, no. Hold the shift key and hit enter, I get those two pieces. Based on that, on the partial tags, the idea is oftentimes you don't know exactly what it is that you're searching for. There might be multiple things in the context of the relationship model that might be relevant, but you don't know. And if you search and you get one that's not so relevant, you don't want to have to go back and search again. So you can grab all of them at once rather quickly. Any other questions so far?
there's a couple questions. So Justin Connolly earlier asked, can you make the arrows take custom paths to make paths go around other elements when it's so busy, or do they always go as an arc?
They're just, well, they're either straight lines or arcs. You can't do a multi-segment line or a multi-segment connection and drag it
Okay.
in odd shapes.
Okay. And then Lori was asking about what is a tag. Could you talk a little bit more about the concept of tag?
Okay. Let's go to here. Okay. The entities on this map, the skills fest map, are presenters, organizations, community issues, or methods. And an entity on this map can only be of one type. So you can define a type. All right. And there might be any one of these for this particular map. In terms of tags, you might have several tags associated with, like here for the presenters. All right. We defined the tags the way we wanted to. We wanted to keep track of when people were presenting. So this particular person presented in 2016, 2017, 2018. We could have defined a data item and said years presenting and added multiple elements to that. But we simply wanted to go ahead and use the tags to do that. So you can have multiple tags. And here you can go ahead and there are all of the people with that tag. Here are all of the people with that tag, so that we'll automatically select them. Did that answer the question?
Great. Lori, let me know if that didn't answer your question.
So you can define the tags to be anything you want to be. And once you define it the first time, you can go ahead and select it from a list thereafter to add it. So you don't have to retype it all the time.
And then we have another question from Donald, and I'm going to ask Donald to actually ask his question because it's pretty convoluted. So Donald, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Oh, okay, got it. He doesn't have audio set up, so hold on. He's saying for SNA, I work mainly with affiliation type social networks with two-mode data. Is there a way to import Usenet or NetDraw generated data sets using formats such as ##h, DL, .dna, or more basically any non-square XLXS or CSV data set? Also, what is the size limit of social networks? Mine are typically several hundred plus events, columns, and several thousands of individual rows.
Okay. You can import data from a spreadsheet. In terms of the detail for this question, I'm going to pass this off to Alex. Are you still here?
Yes. Yeah. So, yes, you can definitely import, and I'm trying to think what the best way to approach. Yeah, probably the best thing to do is to go to docs.kumu.io. I'll put the link in the chat right now, actually, for our import guide, which will show you, you may have seen it already, but it has kind of the requirements, the structure requirements for what your data is supposed to look like in order to be imported into Kumu. But yes, in terms of file formats, only Excel, CSV, and then JSON if you have that available. But most people just do Excel or CSV. Two-mode data, that is completely fine as well. It won't cause any problems that you're using two-mode data. And then the last one was about how much data can Kumu handle. We have a guide with answers on that question. The short answer is that there's no hard limit that we place on how much data you can bring in, but there are limitations imposed by the browser that you're using, the speed of your internet connection, the computer processing power. and definitely the code that we write as well. It comes down to the browser can only draw so many circles and lines on the screen at one time before it just gives up and crashes, and it just doesn't have enough power to do that. But in my experience, you can get to thousands, in the realm of thousands. We're talking thousands of elements and thousands of connections before the browser would just give up and freeze up and not be able to draw that amount. So it's always just kind of a trial and error process. It's different for each individual data set and even each device.
And there's a separate setting so that you can tell it that you really want to handle a large number of data items, which ends up your elements get presented as little squares, all right, as opposed to actually having the elements be circles that you can put images in, such as here. And it's simply because, as Alex said, the loading that it takes on the browser. This is what they call this, fast or?
Yeah, it's you can change. There's a few ways to do it, and that guide will walk you through a few different ones. But you can change. There's a quality setting that you can change. It's always at best by default, but you can change it to low/fast. And there's another setting that you can do from the advanced editor where you can actually change the piece of technology that the browser is using to actually draw all this stuff. There's one that's less power, it's kind of less flexible, and so you can only get squares and straight lines and things like that, but it draws a lot faster. So if you have a lot of data, you can switch to that one. And yeah, the guide on how much data Kumu can handle will walk you through how to troubleshoot that stuff and experiment with it.
So Gene or Alex, if I could follow up on that. So you're saying that you can import a spreadsheet, Excel-like spreadsheet, and you can use that to generate the map?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you can give Kumu a spreadsheet and it will read your spreadsheet and figure out how many circles it has to draw and what the lines are that it has to draw and draw all those lines between them. So a map like the Skills Fest one, I imagine that was probably from a spreadsheet, Gene, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because I mean, drawing all this would be by hand would, oh my God, it'd be so tedious. It would take forever. But from a spreadsheet, if you just have this kind of stuff and output from a survey or something like that, usually it just takes a little bit of finagling to get it into the structure that Kumu needs it to be in, so that Kumu can understand, okay, here are the circles and here are the lines. Sometimes that stuff is tricky. You can always just email support@kumu.io if you have a survey spreadsheet and it's not really working and you're not quite sure what changes need to be made to make it work with Kumu. I eat that stuff for breakfast, so just send me your data and I'll rework it.
That's great. And I'm assuming there's some instructions to say, if you're going to import a spreadsheet in order to generate a map, here's how you need to label columns, rows.
Yeah. So, yep, in this import guide, you can walk through it. There's a little video intro there. And then This is one of our most visited guides, definitely, because people come back to it all the time for reference.
Got it.
Another tip that I have for that one is sometimes, rather than trying to figure out how to structure your spreadsheet, or at least, try and guess and check your way through it, sometimes it's easier to just open up a blank Kumu map out, I don't know, 10, 15 elements and a bunch of connections between them. And then you can export that entire data set to Excel, and it will be already in the format that you need to, because Kumu will just put it in that structure for you. And so you can kind of use that as your template and then see, where certain items went and where certain columns are and different stuff. And you can rework your original spreadsheet to just match that format. And then you can just re-import.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So the strength, the two real strengths I see in Kumu is the initial ease of use, and then the flexibility. But the flexibility, which is a strong point, also derails a lot of people. I say that I run into a lot of people who come to Kumu and come to create a relationship model, and then they get all hung up with how it is that they want to decorate it. Because if they go to settings, if they're in the basic editor, you can then go ahead and say, all right, I want to customize the views, I want to decorate elements, and if I want to decorate elements, I have all of these different options that I can use to decorate the elements. I can decorate all of the elements, or I can decorate a selected group of elements based upon a selection that I make in terms of the data items that are in the relationship model that I've created. And it just goes on and on and on. So my comment to people is, create the relationship model and worry about the decorations later, because they end up floundering around in the swamp, and they don't get the relationship model built. I mean, the most relevant aspect of it is first define the relationships, and then figure out how you want to decorate it to present it to other people. And my comment about, you know, if you can see somebody else's map, it's all recyclable, so that if this map has mostly the kinds of things that you like, you can come here and you can fork this project and make a copy that belongs to you. If you simply like the way that let me go to this. If you like the way some of the pieces are colored, you can go to settings, and you can go to the advanced editor, and you can copy all or any portion of the code that was used to color this. You could copy it and paste it into your own project. So that within the Kumu environment, recycling is a good thing. It will save you an enormous amount of time. So just find something that you like. And personally, I didn't follow my own advice for years, I guess, so that every time I came to create another causal loop diagram project, I ended up having to come here and define the fields in terms of what the connection types were that I used, what the element types were that I used, what the loop types were that I used, and how the way that I wanted it colored, and specifically to be able to do something called popovers, so that all of these definitions show up when you mouse over them. And finally, I came to my senses and said, I will simply create a template that's empty. This is my empty project template, which I've now messed up because I put all these things in it. And simply open that, come here and clone it or fork it to create a new project from that. And it has all of my definitions in it, and I don't have to do anything. So, I mean, if you're going to do a one-off, you know, do it any way you want to. If you're going to do a number of projects and they're going to be similar, recycle the things that you figured out to make your life easier, so that it just isn't an endless turmoil of going through the same steps. Now, in this environment where you put this together, you have zoom in and zoom out and getting to the settings. There are some things down here. This is help. And there are a whole bunch of shortcuts that if you're going to do the same things over and over again, the shortcuts are real nice. The documents, which Alex is real meticulous about trying to keep up with as fast as the developers add things, is first rate. So that it's not a short set of documentation about Kumu. Though if you walk through the beginning, all right, it tells you how to create an account. Your first project tells you the different kinds of templates there are. This particular, check our full guide on templates, is it? And watch this 2-minute video, which will give you a real good description of the difference between the different templates, far better than I can do in 2 minutes. So, I mean, it's there. It's not like you have to flounder around. Oh, they actually have a video on each one of the different types of templates. Good. I told you, Alex continues to update it on an ongoing basis. And every week or two, they send out a message to the entire community about things that have been added. They have they do podcasts. They have a blog for posts, and as I said, the Kumidi, which is the Kumu, the Slack group for Kumu, is marvelous. Alex and Michelle are real good about keeping on top of the questions that people ask. How participant interactive is Kumu?
So I was reading that one, Gene. I think, Alexander, the best answer for this one, and related to the question that you were asking before about mapping communities of practice, Kumu is really good at building models and mapping out networks and systems as they are or as you would like them to be. But I would say, especially for networks, it doesn't work quite as well if you have an entire network of people all in here, all trying to add connections at the same time. Mainly because the tool itself doesn't show you changes in real time. So if you're adding a connection here and somebody adds a different one on another map, you won't see that until you reload the page. So in that line of thinking, and at the risk of giving a sales pitch here, we have a different tool that we are building to do more like participant interactive stuff. And I'll just drop that link in the chat now so that you can check that one out. But basically it's going to be a separate standalone application that you can, open up on your phone and stuff like that. Something that's much more designed to allow a bunch of people to create a network together, form new connections based on what skills and interests they might have. We're building out all kinds of features where it will prompt every so often. It'll prompt two people to connect based on shared skills or maybe some shared mutual connections that they have. So all in all, I mean, a lot of features that you would expect in any social networking tool, but I think different from a lot of them in that the data is going to belong to the network itself. Whereas with anything else, the data belongs to the website and they just sell it to advertisers and that's how they make their money. So that's not the business model that we're going for with Weaver. And I think that's, I'm personally passionate about that kind of business model. So it'll be exciting to see that one evolve. And there is some visualization in there. We use the same stuff that we use on Kumu to draw maps. There's a little bit of that in Weaver, and we have the goal too that you can always export your data from Weaver and then bring it into Kumu to do maybe some more advanced network visualization with it. So we're seeing those tools being pretty compatible in the future.
So
Can I just ask, while you're on that, thank you so much, that's fantastic. So you can export from Kumu to Weaver. Can you do the other way as well, from Weaver to Kumu? Are they interoperable? It kind of goes to one of the questions that Dino had.
Yeah, so right now, I believe, I haven't checked on the feature development in a while. This is a project that it's in beta right now, and we just started working on it this year. So I think you can go from Weaver to Kumu at the moment. I don't know that you can go from Kumu to Weaver directly, but I'm pretty sure there's a way to kind of seed your network data in Weaver. So you can create a bunch of, if you have a bunch of profile data already from people, maybe they filled out a survey from you or something, you can load that into Weaver, and Weaver will fill out all these different profiles and send people emails saying, here's your profile in Weaver, you can log in and then connect and take ownership over this profile and start updating it from there and keeping track of your connections into the future. On your question about Spanish, we don't have neither app is translated into Spanish right now, and the documentation is also not translated into Spanish, but I'm fluent in Spanish, and my coworker Michelle is also fluent in Spanish, so you can email us if you ever want some support in Spanish, and we can do that in person.
And Dino had some other questions embedded in his question about interoperability of using multiple tools like this one, which is what you're talking about with Weaver, but are there other tools? And then also, can you embed Kumu on a website?
You definitely embed Kumu on a website. I'll sound like a broken record right now. I'm going to take a link from the documentation and put it in the chat here. But yeah, there's a guide there that will tell you all about how to get different embedded versions and shareable links. And you can, it looks pretty cool when you have a Kumu map just embedded right there in a website. They're fully interactive as well. So it's not just like a static image of the network itself. It's a fully interactive thing. So people can click and open up profiles And this will all, you won't have to send them out to Kumu to be able to do that. You can just have that right on whatever website you're working from.
So here's a way to actually embed the map itself in a web page using an iframe, and you can decide whether or not it should include the sidebar, this part here on the left, or whether whether or not to include the current position and scale that you're looking at when you do that. Now, so you can embed the project itself, or you can go ahead and create a presentation. There's a presentation capability which is extremely robust in terms of you can take the existing project and you add pages to the presentation. And when you add a page, you get to define whether that page is a slide based upon the map. It's a title slide. It's just, you put a title in for it, like the basic title itself. It's a text slide where you go ahead and provide a title and whatever text you want on the slide. It can be an image slide where you can provide a URL to an image, or you can actually import an image. This one, I already got rid of that one. And you can tell it whether you want it to cover the entire page, you want the image to be contained, or you want it to figure out automatically how it sizes it to fit there. And it can also be an embed slide. I have Kumu presentations that have other Kumu presentations as a slide in the Kumu presentation, or one of the embed pages is actually an Insight Maker simulation that's active in the middle of the Kumu presentation, so you can run the Insight Maker simulation and see how that simulation evolves over time. And you click next and you're back into the Kumu presentation, so that they have provide for those things that you can interact with on the web readily. You can go ahead and do embeds. If I do this, let me copy this. Copy. All right, go make a liar out of me. I was going to grab something and copy. Oh, it won't show it until I go ahead and actually create a presentation out of it. That's the problem.
So Gene, this is Kumu's own presentation package or software. This is not just like putting it into PowerPoint or something.
No, this is just a dimension of Kumu. You go, let's see. Okay, I'm going to cancel this. In other words, well, let me go ahead and save the changes. Exit. Publish the presentation, make it public. Could be private or public. Publish the presentation. There's the presentation itself. It's still creating it. Give it a second. All right, so here's the presentation that I just created. It looks at this page, this page. It's just two slides and the initial entry page. So where I was, I'm in the Kumu project right here. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the project, and I simply go here to presentations, and I have the option to create multiple presentations from the same project. You also have the option, which I didn't mention, of being able to create multiple maps in the same project, so that we've been working on this in attempts by various participants to create better understandable cross sections of this particular map.
So can you download or export these presentations, or do you need to be connected to Kumu online in order to use the presentations?
The presentation is online. It's accessed through the web.
Okay.
It's a separate URL. All right. So you don't, Kumu is not running. It's created a view of snapshots of the project to be presented in a certain way.
But so essentially, you have to be connected though online into Kumu to be able to use these presentations. These don't become standalone.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
It would work if you were to load it up and then get an airplane or turn off your internet or something like that. As long as you have the presentation up in your browser and it's been loaded, you can click through the entire thing and see all the content inside of it and interact with the map. But if you were to then reload the page and you didn't have internet access, then you would lose that. So yes, at least to start the presentation, you have to have internet access to get it loaded up.
Now, part B of my interoperability question was partly answered with the comment about the Excel. My question is, if we want to use Kumu as parts of a designed workflow or process, is Excel the only way, or are there other ways of letting data flow through multiple tools, which include Kumu?
So the only other major, well, there's two other major ways, I guess. You can connect a Google Sheet. So if you have data in a Google Sheet, you can connect that to Kumu so that every time Kumu reloads the page, it will go to your Google Sheet and take out the newest data. So that's one option. The other option is if you have some, I would say it's a more complicated and more sophisticated option. If you have, for example, like some sort of application that outputs data, you can then import that. I just put another, oh, maybe I didn't copy the right URL. There it is. I just put another guide in the chat that shows you how to import from JSON. I think that's not as common, but there's at least one case I know of people doing that where they have built a survey tool to do social network analysis surveys, and then their tool creates a JSON. Their application just generates that data set, and that just lives online. And then so Kumu can go get that data and then import it. Again, that stuff doesn't work in real time, but it's close to it. Every time you refresh the page, it will go and get any new data that's been brought in automatically. So that's an easier way to do it if you want to just have kind of like some ongoing workflow of you have data coming in. You don't want to be uploading from Excel, once a week or some regular interval like that. Easier to just do Google Sheets or this JSON connection, and then you can just set up the link one time and forget about it. And then you know that every time you go back to the map and reload it, you'll get any new data that might have come in from anywhere else you have.
So here is the place that people get themselves in trouble, and that is doing decorations. So I said you can come here and you can go over here, and even in the basic editor, people use the basic editor to decorate elements and connections and create filters and create highlights, and they do that on an ongoing basis for a few weeks, and then they go and look at the advanced editor and they start writing their own code. And after you look at the way the code is written, it becomes rather obvious in a short period of time how it's put together. The thing is, there are such an array of options that if you look at the property reference, these are the set of controls that you have in terms of things you can do with arrows or borders or bullseyes or colors and delays and flag sizes and font weights and image sizes, and it's just, it's option city. And people end up putzing around with options to a point where they don't get work done. So my recurring comment or advice to people is go create the relationship model. And don't worry about the fact that, well, I got people and I have cities and I have skills and well, don't worry about that all initially. Put the data in there and get the relationship model created. You can then go ahead and add new fields, whatever you want to call it. You can have a different types for the fields. You can have an autocomplete. You can have a defined set of choices that the user has to pick from for that field. And then you can actually group them into categories, and you can then tell them that they only show up for certain kinds of elements. If we look at this one, fields, notice that the connection types show up for all fields. The stock take. All of a sudden, what am I looking at? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong. Hold on while I regroup.
So while you regroup, could Alex answer Gemma's question on how can you show the evolution of relationships in different slides? Like if you're using different slides for a presentation, but you want to show relationships from one slide to the other. I believe that's what she means.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it's kind of an approach that I think Gene pioneered, but using presentations, you can apply something called focus, where you can show just a small section of the map. And then as you click through different slides, you can reveal steadily more and more pieces of the map. That's kind of the general process of how you would do it. And once, I think maybe we'll open it up and Gene can show you the workflow, but it's pretty simple, it's quick. Just the workflow of changing focus across presentation slides so that you can reveal a network system piece by piece.
Oh, so if I jump into the middle of here, I can select this. I then have the option of doing focus, and I can say focus on the selected item, which is just that piece. I can then go ahead and say, well, I really want 1 degree out from there. I can do it over here to expand or contract the focus step by step. I can do it with the keyboard to n levels based upon the numbers on the keyboard. And if I actually want to walk through this thing in a different way, I can hold down the shift key, click here and hold, and I'm changing the point of focus for what I'm looking at. So I'm going to change my focus to this point, and that's what I'm focused on now as opposed to what I was focused on. So you can unfold this map. You can walk through it like you're walking through a maze. There's also the option to be able to to do a set of functional controls so that you can unfold this. This was set up using a feature called showcase based upon loops, so that I can unfold this. There's one loop, there's the next loop, the next loop, the next loop. Or I could do them one at a time and say, I only want this one. Now let me look at the next one. Or I can use them additively. So I don't have to look at it all at once. I can sort of allow it to grow. I use this to do storytelling so that I'll present this model step by step to say, we begin here, and then this is a logical addition, and then this part and then this part, and then this part, and then I can talk about it collectively. So I don't have to show it all at once. And that actually works with, we implemented this all the way through so that this one has a lot of dots with it. And there are options so that you can have these actually have labels on them, or you can have them in a drop down from the top or the side, or it's just, like I said, there's an endless array of options, and they're all documented very well.
So, Jim, I'm sorry, the connections between the elements, those are, it's a fixed set of possibilities. I mean, I see different shades and weights of arrows and, you know, broken lines and those kind of things.
They are all options that you can deal with. The colors of the loops are dependent upon the type. No, sorry. The colors of the connections depend upon the type that was assigned. So if you look at this, it adds to the same, and this is subtracts from. But notice we also have a connection strength, which can be strong, medium, or weak, and that's what defines how wide they are. And that's coded down here to say if connection type is subtracts from, this is the color and it's dashed. And the connection strength is strong, then the size is 14. If it's weak, then the size is 3. I mean, there's an option to control just about everything on the map to decorate it the way that you think it makes sense to make it meaningful to your audience. And it's just sort of an endless array of options, which is what people tend to get lost in. Because
so is there some standardization to the meaning, though, of those types of connections? In other words, if you go back and forth between a map and a spreadsheet, is there some normal way within Kumu that automatically generates the type of connections, or is this really up to the designer as to how to define those?
When you initially create, when you initially create a new project,
mm-hmm.
you have to give it a name, an optional description.
Okay.
Then once you create it, you then have to say, do I want a system map, a stakeholder map, an SNA map, or an other?
Okay.
And that gives you, if I go to other, create other, and tell it that I want a stock and flow diagram, and create that, what I end up with over here is setting template stock and flow. So it's got a whole bunch of definitions in that template that predefines it for me, so that if I create an element and then I create another element, right, this connection type can be a flow. So notice it changed the characteristic of that, because within that template it said there are 3 kinds of connections that you can have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said about, if you're going to create the same kind of maps on a lot of them, you know, more than 2 or 3, figure out the way that you want them to look on an ongoing basis and create yourself a template, which is one of the default templates, plus all of the other things that you want to do to it. In terms of, I also want all of the, go back to the basic editor, tell it that I want to decorate the elements, and I want the elements to be red. I'm not sure, this won't work well because they're done.
I think something you're getting at too, Gary, is that you can customize the types that are available. You can add more, you can remove the ones that are default from the template. All of that stuff can be driven by your spreadsheet as well. So if you think about your spreadsheet structure, your sheet is going to have, if it's elements, it'll have the first column will be label, and that'll just be like the label of each circle that gets placed on the map. Every other column, type, tags, you know, net worth, sector, whatever, any other column you might have in your spreadsheet goes into that profile. And if it's one of the preset fields, which are type, image, description, or tags, it'll get placed at the top visually. It'll fill out those parts at the top. If it's anything other than that, for example, sector or net worth would be custom fields. Those will just be added in the profile in the section kind of at the bottom. It'll just be a long list of all your custom fields and the data that was in your spreadsheet for those fields. And you can change the decorations based on that. So if you have 15 different connection types, you can do whatever you want with those. Those will pop up in the profile, and then you can create rules based on those. So you can do something like Gene is doing right now, where you change the color based on what type it is. You can change the size based on some other field you might have. All of that stuff is fully customizable, and it's another reason as well to do what Gene says, which is to focus on the map that you're making, focus on your data, focus on the structure first. Because it's super easy once you have all that stuff in place and the profiles are all filled out. It's incredibly easy to go through and tinker with different decoration styles and stuff. So it takes practice, I think, to be able to look at a data set, and without even opening up Kumu, you'll be like, okay, these are my possibilities. I think I'm going to use this one for color coding, this one for something. And you can already start to form in your head a concept of what the map is going to look like eventually. And then you can start working toward that concept, or you can sketch that on a napkin or something like that to help you visualize it better. But all of the hard work starts with filling out the profile and getting those connections and elements on the map itself. And from there, you can just kind of explore and have fun.
So there's no necessary underlying logic that's required.
No,
the elements and the connections. And okay.
Correct. Yeah. Some of the templates do come with types. For example, this stock and flow template gives you a flow, a plus, and a minus as your default options for the connection type. But every single template is really just a collection of default settings. You can use them, you can expand on them, you can remove all of them and start from scratch. If you knew all of the settings that were in a template, you could actually load up that template and then undo everything using other rules and settings and get back to what would have been your default if you just went with the custom template, which is no default settings whatsoever. So yeah, there's nothing that you can't change. There's just certain templates that, you know, nudge you in a certain direction, and you can go where you want from there.
Great, thank you.
In terms of what I said about when you come in here and you say decorate connections and you use this wizard to do the decoration, if you go back and look, you'll see that it created this from the wizard. It talked about how to color that particular type of connection, which you can then just edit from here. And if you go to the advanced editor, you can see the code that it created by you using that wizard. And that's how people get familiar with how the scripts are written. They use the wizard, and then they look at what the wizard created, and they say, well, I understand that. Let me go ahead and do connection type equals plus and make it some other color. And okay, I mean, it's just a text field where you can edit the scripts. And there are more capabilities for editing the scripts than you can get to through the wizards. But the wizards are a great place to start, because otherwise it would drive you nuts trying to figure out how to write this stuff.
Yeah, that's another great tip, is if you want to start learning how to write that code in there, that's probably the best thing you can do, is just tinker with the wizard itself and then make a change in the wizard, flip over to the advanced editor, because every time you change there, Kumu's going to write code for you to reflect what change you made. And vice versa, actually. If you write code in the advanced editor and then you flip back to the basic editor, Kumu will update the basic editor, the wizard, to show the code that you wrote. It'll make changes visually based on that when applicable, when those features are accessible from the wizard. But yeah, some of this stuff is kind of, it's easy to start to figure it out after you get used to reading it. So for example, you can see like on line 17 there, it says element type equals organization, and then there's a color and a size. I think it's pretty easy to tell that that's just saying, okay, any element whose element type is organization, make it this color and give it a size of 29. And if you wanted that to be larger than 29, you just go in there and change that 29 to a 50 or whatever. And then you can see instantly that it updates on the map. So yeah, it's completely it's not necessary for most use cases, but there are features that you can only do from the advanced editor, certain things that you can only do from the advanced editor. And then the most common stuff that people use most often across all different types of maps, those are the kinds of things that we build a nice interface around it and put it into the wizard so that people can get to it more easily. But yeah, I think some people, it's just a question of what workflow they prefer. Some people only use the wizard. Some people only use the code. Some people use a mixture of both. And it just, you know, you'll fall into your own kind of personal workflow after working for a while in the tool.
And when I created this particular focus in this Austin social entrepreneurship map, it wrote this line in the code, focus, mission capital out 2. And if I clear the focus, you notice it edited that line out of the script. So everything is done based upon the scripts. I mean, there's no real there's a lot of behind the scenes magic here. But in terms of the way that things get manipulated on an ongoing basis, all right? All it's doing at the moment is changing the out on that particular line. So you can look at what's happening. It's not hidden, and get a better sense of how it's going. But there are also, in other words, there are also options here for doing filtering, how you want to filter certain things in or out of what's being viewed, how you want to go ahead and manage the connections. I mean, all of this is selectable, and there's ways to change the overall color scheme simply by selections. So it's I consider it an amazingly versatile environment, only a small piece of which I have figured out how to leverage. But though, to have that extent of capability at your fingertips for free that you can become productive with in 15 minutes is awesome. And then the fact that it has such a capacity for extending what you initially defined is the other part of awesome. So.
Great presentation, Gene. We still have about 10 minutes if there's other questions. I'm just going to ask everybody to chime in with your question.
Hello. Hi. Let me ask a question to Alex, please. Alex, if I do like Gene says, I concentrate on the relationships. I put about 10 elements on a map, and I make connections between them, and I make a couple of loops out of that, maybe a few loops out of that. But I unpin it. I unpin all the elements. What defines the way those elements gravitate towards each other?
Yeah, so and this is a great example map actually, because this one is floating, so we can see how these things work. There's 3 basic forces at work. The most basic, and I would say probably the weakest one that plays the least factor in how things are laid out, is there's kind of this like concept of gravity. So behind the scenes, to draw all these things, Kumu is just using a normal XY grid where, you know, X32, Y45, whatever. And so it remembers the position that each one is in, and can kind of move them around in that way. There is a 0-0 origin point in that grid, and there's a gravity force that pulls everything toward that 0-0 point. And so even though you can't see the grid here, right there in the center of this cloud, the 0-0 is somewhere around there because everything's kind of gravitating around in a circle around this point. The next one, there is a force that we call particle charge. That's between elements. And you can think of that as, it's the same as when you hold 2 ends of a magnet together, the north ends of a magnet, and they push away from each other because they're the same end. Elements are like that, where elements will always push away from each other because they don't want to be close to each other. So you've got those, you know, gravity pulling everything towards the center, but the elements, they're not going to go all the way to the center because they're pushing out away from each other, trying to get away. And then the third force is just the connections between them. So connections have the power to pull two elements a little bit closer together, not all the way, but they can pull them a little bit closer together, even though they're trying to push away. So,
I'm sorry. If I change the size of elements, one element I make at 50 and one element I make at 10, does that change the balance?
the size of the element doesn't make its force stronger. There's kind of like an underlying value that you can use to control the force. Usually, though, you won't need to affect that stuff directly. You can use something called a layout preset. And I wonder, is this a forked version of this map that you have, Gene? Or
I can't get. No, I can't get
the more options.
No.
Maybe go to one that you do have, that you are the owner of, so we can see that more options thing. It doesn't have to be a floating map. Anything is fine. But yeah, so then just open up, get to more options from there. We can do that.
Well, let me go. Hold on.
So are gravity and then the other term that you use, are they equal across all the elements?
I wouldn't say that they're equal per se. I mean, it's also kind of like a black box of how they get processed. We have a custom algorithm that we wrote to kind of balance out those forces and apply all of them in different ways based on the positions of others, and then based on that, calculate the final set of X and Y coordinates for every single element. And so there's, at the end of the day, there's no way to explain how that works except by going through every line of the algorithm and saying, you know, this is what this piece of code means, this is what that one does. And so it's like, it's kind of a complex thing, but in general, there's those three forces at work. And then as Gene is showing here,
which option is it under?
It's under custom view defaults. So you go to the wizard, you click more options, custom view defaults, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. And then under layout settings there's a preset. So this map is already preset to hairball. It starts at auto by default. Under layout settings, there's the heading, Gene, layout settings above, maybe change layout to force directed. And then you'll see that layout settings section becomes available above general settings.
Where?
A little further up. Yeah, right there. Preset, layout settings. Preset.
Oh, here, okay.
And so you have three choices here for the preset. Everything starts on auto. Every template, every map, all of them start on auto by default. And you can see on this map, this one is particularly densely connected. So a map like this, if it's just on auto or dense, it's going to be essentially unreadable. Even if you use focus and filter to trim things out and zoom in and focus on certain stuff, it's still going to be pretty much unreadable because there's so much going on. It's just, it's a highly connected network, and that's just the nature of those networks. But so you can switch to this hairball preset. This map, I would say, is pretty uniquely highly interconnected, to the point that even with this hairball setting, which is the loosest available preset, so the map is going to spread out farther than any other preset, it's still pretty dense in there. Most maps, I would say, aren't this highly connected, and once you get to this hairball preset, everything gets pretty loose and pretty readable. So the point I'm making here is that most often there is a way to change the underlying gravity, to change the particle charge, to change how strong connections are, but usually you won't have to dig in that deep and be editing those values directly in the advanced editor. You can just use the wizard to flip between different presets and you'll find one that works pretty well. I'll pull up the guide here. If you ever do want to get in and dive in and like really fine tune those different forces and read a little bit more about them, you can go to the guide. I just dropped in a link on the force directed layout.
Right, thank you.
So yeah, I would say I've been using Kumu for like 5 years, and it's been a handful of times that I really felt it was necessary to actually go in and type layout gravity and then assign my own custom number to it to change that stuff. So
for this particular project, spring strength, gravity, and particle charge were explicitly defined by whoever did this.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome.
Any parting comments, Gene? We're down to 2 minutes.
Let me do hand puppets? No. Yeah. Modeling is not an unnatural act, okay? But it seems to be for a lot of people. There was a time when a blank sheet of paper was my absolute worst enemy because I couldn't figure out where to start. Back to the beginning, it's all connected. It doesn't matter where you start, just start. Use Nike as a guide, just do it. And it's a trial and learning process. If you don't do it, you're not gonna learn squat. So do it. And everything that you do is an opportunity to learn to do it better. But if you don't do it, you know. So I mean, that's my parting thought. Just, you know, you get better at creating models by creating models. And I tell people that are creating causal loop diagrams, the absolute best place to start is go create a savings account in a bathtub. I mean, these two relationship models contain all of the pieces that you will ever find in any relationship model, any causal loop diagram relationship model you ever create. It's all there. And once you do those, you're just making copies of pieces of them over and over and over again.
Okay, great, thank you. Great words of wisdom, and Gene, and thanks for sharing all your knowledge. And it sounds like you and Alex are available to anyone who has questions.
Yes, and as I'm putting my email address, SYSTEMS at gmail.com is now in the chat window, so grab it. Yeah, I spend the majority of my time interacting with people and Kumu.
Great.
So,
all right.
Not as much time as Alex spends, but I spend a lot.
Yeah, I'm interested to get into another discussion about the whole spreadsheet concept. That's pretty exciting. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Thank you all.